All right, we know that President Biden likes to cultivate his public image as kindly Uncle Joe, he's often referred to. But apparently behind the scenes, I'm talking about in private, he reportedly has a bit of a temper and unleashes it on his staff. That's according to an article by Axios. Alex Thompson is the national political reporter, and he joins me now. Alex, I'm glad that you're here. We've been on SiriusXM together. We can't swear here right now on cable. But let me ask you, many people may not have read this in full to fully understand what exactly President Biden is being accused of doing or how he's behaving. Break it down for me.
Yeah, so, in public, maybe he'll whisper a bit when he's trying to make a point, but behind closed doors, he's prone to yelling. It's much saltier language, and he'll really angrily grill into his staff to the point that some staffers are actually a bit afraid to meet alone with the president.
Really?
And sometimes they'll bring in an extra person or two in order so that the firing line is a little bit distributed among several different staffers.
This runs really counter to the image that most people, I think, would have of President Biden. How are we knowing this? I mean, how do you get the reporting? Who's complaining about this? Is it current, former staff? Who?
Both current, former, and by former I mean former White House staff, current White House and administration staff. Plus, you even have people going back. We had a headline today. We called it Old Yeller. But I can confirm to you that Joe Biden was a young Yeller, too. And so we even talked to staff that went back to the early 2000s. And the fact is that this is a guy that has been professionally staffed for more than half of his life. And he's had a long life. So it's been over 50 years where he's had people staffing him. And as a result, there's a generational difference, too. He's really, really tough on staff, and he already had that, as he calls, get his Irish up. He already had that Irish temper, and he'll really lay into people, and in some cases, make them feel humiliated, make them feel embarrassed, and really feel like, and truly be cussed out.
Many might be surprised by this, because you might recall when he spoke about respect and dignity, and the idea of if you're working with him, if you act in that way, you get fired. Well, listen to what he had to say.
I'm not joking when I say this. If you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. On the spot. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody is entitled to be treated with decency and dignity. That's been missing in a big way the last 4 years.
So you hear that. And then there's the moment when he was calling a Fox reporter a stupid SOB. Not my words. You know what? Let me play it. It's not Laura Coates' words. Listen to this.
Will you take questions on inflation then?
Let's move. Thank you. Thank you
Do you
all.
think inflation is a political liability ahead of the midterms?
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a...
Okay, so there has been different sides we have certainly seen. Why are we just hearing this now, though? If you're talking about this reputation or the idea of more than 50 years worth of staffing, has this been known throughout Washington and it's just not been covered, or this is something that's now become an issue?
So there's a few different pieces to this. One is that Joe Biden, because he's been in the public life for 50 years, he knows the difference between a public persona and a private persona. And he's a very, he didn't become president by accident, right? That requires a level of public persona skill that sometimes is different than your private persona. In this case, why it's so interesting is that his public persona leans so much on him being civil and his civility. And that clip you just showed about, the standard he was setting for his White House, I can tell you some former Biden administration aides don't think that he's lived up even to his own standard. Now, the other thing I would point out as well is that a lot of, Biden does have a side of him that is incredibly generous, that is incredibly compassionate. It's why, despite being a really tough boss, he has had this very same inner core of advisors for sometimes going back several decades. They realize what they've gotten into, and they can sort of go with the highs and the lows. And I think that's part of the reason why he's actually had a relatively stable staff. So it's a little bit public persona versus private persona, and also the fact that he does actually have that compassionate, generous side.
The political cynic in me wonders if this now makes him more attractive to voters in the sense of away from the way he's being perceived by some as sort of the friendly, friendly Uncle Joe, and how he's been talked about pejoratively by Donald Trump, to the firebrand mentality of things. How has the White House received this? They must be thrilled by your reporting.
I wouldn't say they were thrilled. I would say there were a few advisors in the White House that I think part of the reason they may have talked to me is because they thought it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing in the world if this side of him got out a little bit.
So I was wondering. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think some people were like, "You think he's senile? Let me tell you." Sort of that thing. Like, I just got cussed out behind closed doors for 10, 15 minutes for messing up this little small thing in a briefing. That being said, when I went to the White House, it was really interesting because this White House's comms team is very tough. They really defend their people. Even a slay, like a little comma out of line, they really go after. And in this case, it was like, yeah, a lot of this stuff happens. Let's give you a little bit more context. It was a little bit of out of character where sometimes they really go to the mat. In this case, they're like, yeah, this is who he is sometimes behind closed doors.
Alex Thompson, thank you for your reporting. Really interesting. Thank you so much.